Welcome to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast, brought to you by Lexis Nexis Risk Solutions. Established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report on the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world. Follow the conversation using hashtag TFD News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times. Hello, and welcome back once again to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. I am here as ever with Francis and Tyler. Guys, how are you doing this week?
Hi, Polly. It's great to be back. Yes, been a very, very, very busy week at the Fintech Times and covering a lot of very interesting topics in line with, of course, we got World Earth Day this week, so looking a lot at that. So yeah, it's been a good week. What about you?
Yeah, no, lovely week here. I wish the weather picked up because right now it's very miserable where I am. But other than that, all pretty good. Francis, how about you?
You know, I think I've said it before, but the day that we sort of say that we're not busy at the Fintech Times will be a very interesting one. But I mean, I can only agree with Tyler. It has been extremely busy as we're ramping up to May. We're looking forward to starting RegTech, so I've been sort of working towards that. But you know, it's been a good week, and I'm delighted to be here with you guys today.
Amazing stuff. Well, of course, we are not alone this week, and we have a very special guest joining us for the podcast. I'd love to welcome on Dalbir Sahota. Thank you so much for joining us, Dal.
Absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I see it as a great privilege to join you today. So thank you so much.
Well, amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't you just give us a bit of an intro as to who you are and kind of the things that you do?
Brilliant. So being probably becoming a bit of a dinosaur in industry, I would say. So I've been working in industry just over 20 years. Spent about 14 years working in the banking industry, maybe 16 years actually. 16 years in the banking industry, working in payments, in compliance, transformation. And then I joined Lexis Nexis Risk Solutions about 5 years ago to really look at the market problems. So institutional problems, well coverage there in terms of what I was working with a team on to transform, but now looking at it from an industry point of view, those customer problems, those market problems. And this role has given me plenty of that, me and the team, to solve for those market problems. So whether it's fundamentally in payments across the globe, daily vision of getting up in the morning is all about reducing friction in payments.
Yeah, amazing stuff. And so we're thrilled to have you here today and really cannot wait to get your insight. I believe you brought an article that we're going to be discussing a little bit later on. I don't know if you want to give us a bit of a sneak peek into the kind of thing that's about.
Yeah, I think headline is it's really around the true impact of failed payments across the globe. So done some research across the globe and just bringing those insight in terms of where is there pain across the market when it comes to payment friction and some of the drivers behind that aspect to the failed impact of payments, and really looking at sort of directionally where customers and the market is going, and really how we are evolving some of our solutions to address some of those key problems out there.
Fantastic stuff. Well, we look forward to learning a little bit more about that in just a bit. But first, we're going elsewhere in the payments industry. And Francis, you brought us an article to get some discussion going today.
Yeah, I did. Thanks, Polly. And Dal, I sort of saw what you wanted to bring to the table today, and I thought it'd be interesting if we took a deep dive into perhaps a specific region to sort of discuss that. Maybe bring in some of the other regions as well as we sort of delve into the world of payments. So the article that I've decided to bring to the table today is how real-time payments are redefining the Asia-Pacific e-commerce industry. And it comes from FYST or FIST. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. I presume it's FYST. And they have released the second installment of a 3-part report named The Map of World Payments, which drills deep into e-commerce payment trends across Asia-Pacific region. And APAC is a really interesting region because I think, as we've probably discussed here on the Fintech Times before, and as Dal, I'm sure you're aware, the APAC region is sort of an innovator in the payments industry. I mean, if all we need to do really is look at, you know, their sort of, I want to say sort of crypto innovation, but of course crypto has been banned in China, but then you also see CBDC's development there and the digital yuan, which is doing it incredibly well. So I suppose it really is an innovator. And of course, there are other countries in the region. It's not just China. So the data from the FYST report also looks at Australia, New Zealand, India, China, Japan, Thailand, South Korea, the Philippines, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Indonesia, and lastly, Malaysia. And it exposes how real-time payments are transforming the e-commerce industry. So, in the report, it found that digital wallets are found to represent nearly 70% of e-commerce transaction value across the region as a whole, and growth rates suggest no sign of slowing down. I think that is first and foremost extremely interesting because, I mean, again, it sort of just backs that point that I was saying before of this regional adoption of digitization. I mean, we're seeing it across the globe, really. I mean, in Latam, we're seeing it in America, we're seeing it in, North America, I should say. Even in Europe, we are seeing this huge wave of digitization, but I don't know if it's necessarily to this same extent. So I found that really interesting, first and foremost. And then the report also goes into detail about New Zealand and how the buy now, pay later services are set to comprise around 17% of e commerce expenditure by 2025. Again, we've discussed BNPL to a great deal at the Fintech Times. And I also just find it really interesting to see that, you know, a technology that I would say has only sort of been introduced in like the last, or really taken off at least in the last 5 or so years, especially since the onset of the pandemic. To see that there is this such big adoption as it is right now on a relatively new payment trend, I think is just really, really interesting. Going on, the report discussed is the value of cross-border payments. Again, something that we've discussed in great detail. If we look at Swift and sort of transferring money abroad and how difficult and sort of costly that can be, the value of cross-border payments is anticipated to hit $250 trillion by 2027, according to the report. And as e-commerce businesses move forward, merely offering digital payment capabilities to seek full 360, they are seeking full a full 360-degree advice and support, which is just, again, more indications of how digitization is taking off at such a high level. So before I throw this to you guys, I wanted to sort of just touch on another region that the first part of the report discusses, which is the Middle East and Africa. And in 2020, only 17.8% of sales were online. However, if we go to 2023, more than 21% of global sales were taking place online. And there's a prediction for it to rise to 23% by 2025 when global total e-commerce expenditure is set to hit $8.3 trillion. So I just wanted to throw those stats out there, really, just to show the impact and sort of I guess it's Asia's place within, or the APAC region's place within the grander scheme of things. So I guess, Polly, I'll go to you first on this one. Did you have any thoughts on the findings?
You know what really struck me, and it's probably going to sound a bit silly, but the fact that digital wallets were found to represent nearly 70% of e-commerce transaction values in the region, I just thought, wow, that's a really big number. And obviously I knew it was going to be a big number, especially in this day and age, and the push to digital and the digital sort of preference that they have over there, what with like Alipay and WeChat Pay and things like that. But 70% is just such a significant number, and that really struck me when I was looking through this article. And I think just kind of in general, payments are always going to be such an important thing for everyone, right? And I know that's like probably like a really dumb thing to say, but everyone makes payments, everyone makes payment every day. And so to make them as efficient and as friction free as is absolutely possible is really crucial. And I thought this was really interesting that it went into sort of very local use payment methods in each country and giving insights to the different merchants that they can use to help, start optimize their own checkout processes as well. I think obviously that's going to be a very useful bit of information to anyone who's looking to operate in the area. But generally, I think it's great to see infrastructure improvements in payments sort of across the APAC region. And they've always been pretty hot on the payments trends, right? And leading the way a lot of the time, especially with digital payments. But to see the introduction of real-time payments and instant payment systems and things like that, all helping to promote that financial inclusion, which then goes on to generate the economic growth and really just helps to bring the whole region sort of up to speed, I think is fantastic. So yeah, it was a really interesting article to bring to the table today, Francis.
Yeah, I think, that point that you raised there about 70%, I think that figure can quite easily go over someone's head, because I think when we think of like a majority, our natural instincts are sort of to think perhaps 90 to or 80 to 90%, maybe even 100%. That's when you're like, this is really, had an impact. But 7 in 10 people using digital payment methods. I mean, the easiest comparison for me to make is Pix in Brazil, and just how vastly adopted it's been, and to see that digital wallets are now that you know that go-to solution, even, I think, is really innovative and progressive in the region. Dal, I want to bring you into the conversation here. What did you have any thoughts on the article?
Yeah, I think it's not massively surprising because of the landscape within Asia and some of the backdrop of a couple of the points that you mentioned in terms of financial inclusion. If you look at the World Economic Forum, there's been a clear goal around Indonesia and for India, where there's literally, somewhere in the region of 1 billion people that didn't have a bank account. If you look at those two regions or two countries, they've skipped an entire card generation. So they've gone straight from cash to digital wallet or digital exchange of funds and making payments. No card payments, straight onto mobile, straight onto digital wallets. And that's, the kind of speed at which payments is moving at in that region and the level of innovation that they have. Like, take, for example, Singapore, where there's actually a real-time payments mechanism between Singapore and India. Therefore, in terms of historically, if you wanted to make a cross-border payment between India and Singapore, you could probably catch a flight from Singapore to India before the payment actually arrived. Now, the payment can be made, and even before you board the plane, the money's reached the destination. So I think it's exciting. I think it's very representative of how the region likes to move very, very fast and very collegiately. Because if you look at those governments coming together and the regulators coming together, it's that collegiate way and approach that's led to that speed. There's a good African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I think they're very much taking that approach. I think also the customer expectations, like looking around this virtual room today, we all have expectations of how we should be buying things and the way we buy things and the means at which we can buy. And our lives have been fundamentally changed by the pandemic. Transaction, the trajectory of travel that the pandemic has delivered means that we are spending more online through e-commerce channels. And one of the things that I think, Francis, you mentioned around buy now, pay later schemes. There's been an acceleration, and I believe that acceleration, and I think the report does talk to some extent, is driven by consumer behaviour. I.e., I don't want to go to a high street shop and pick out things anymore. I want those goods and services to be delivered to my door with least friction as possible. And how I choose to pay for them may not be on the same day. They may be spread over. And the customer experience is really sort of accelerated and really elevated to be really superior in my opinion. For example, if I want to buy an item of clothing, I will happily order two of the same item in different sizes on a buy now pay later scheme. In the knowledge that I haven't paid for it at the outset, I can spread that commitment to pay later, and I can return the item before even the money's been taken out. What a great customer experience that has out there. So I think there's a mixture of aspects in the report and what we're seeing. I do think there's a balance between faster payments for the purposes of better customer experience, reduced cost, less friction. But the other side of the equation is risk. And when I talk about risk, it's about fraud impacts. It's about regulatory impacts around payments going super fast in the absence of all the checks and balances being made to ensure that all the payments are legitimate and are coming from a legitimate place.
Yeah, I mean, there was just a ton of things there that you said that I thought were great. This idea that the region has skipped a whole payment method, really. And it just, as Polly sort of alluded to as well, it just adds to this idea of financial inclusion, because it is just so accessible and it is so readily available for people to access, and it's easy to access as well. It's not like there's a load of barriers to adoption either. It's literally have a phone, download an app, and you're set and ready to go. Tyler, did you have any thoughts on perhaps something that Dal said or on the report itself?
I think that this conversation has picked up on lots of really important topics. And I think, above all, as well as you mentioned with the market in Latam, Francis, in your introduction, that it's really resonating with what's happening in APAC right now. I think, first of all, the second part of FYST's report is really, really intriguing. I thought the first part of the report, as we mentioned, that looked into the Middle East was even more intriguing. But I think if we look like on a sort of broader scale at the sort of rise of different payment methods across the region, we see that the findings of FYST are really confirmed by additional findings that came out this year. For example, we saw that Unacash showed that buy now pay later was really rising in the Philippines, but that users were actually using it for small ticket items. It's just one example, but we've usually seen this sort of technology be used for purchases of high value. So I think that, yes, it is coming through, but how people are using it and what they're using it for is very, very different from what we might usually expect. And I think that's something that should really be heeded by the providers of these services. I mean, that was just buy now, pay later as an example from Unicash's perspective. But I think developers and providers of these services should really be taking into consideration just how differently these services are being used and why they're being used by the people they're being used by. But all in all, I think it's really, really fascinating. I'm really looking forward to the third part of the report coming out quite soon. So we'll have to watch out for that.
Absolutely. I think the third part of the report will be incredibly interesting. But before we just move on to the next article, I just wanted to sort of touch on what you said there, Tyler, and this idea that, depending on the regions, we are seeing different spending habits. As we've discussed earlier, we were talking about, consumer habits. And I was working on an article recently, which was sort of saying that businesses have to find the fine line between innovation and sort of digitization and customer loyalty and trust, and that there is a fine line between, you can't just prioritize one over the other. And I remember that when I first joined the FinTech Times a few years ago now, but I remember the first sort of introduction that I had to buy now pay later was sort of discussing the fears surrounding it, and how it's so easily mismanaged, and how people can fall into great amounts of debt just because they haven't had that education on how to properly use this. And I think that touches on what you've just said there, Tyler, on these providers need to be very aware of their clientele, and what they're spending their money on, or sorry, how they're using their services, or things could sort of escalate in a pretty bad way for their consumers, which, I mean, it's a lose-lose situation for the provider and for the consumer. So yeah, no, I think this has been a really, really great discussion, and I mean, looking forward to diving into the next one. Dal, if you want to take it away.
I think specifically, if I look at some of the research that we've done, one of the things that really surprised me in that research was, in terms of straight through processing, i.e., a payment being initiated and reaching its end destination seamlessly, that straight through processing is on average about 25%, which, to some of the points we've picked up on here today, not everybody's on the same level playing field. Like, some may be higher, some may be lower, some may be in the mids, some may be just starting. And it's just the maturity of the market is very volatile depending on country by country. So that was one of the areas that really surprised me in the report. I think the other two aspects that really surprised me was, one is the impact that it has to customer retention. That number, I think, was around the sort of 49 to 50% mark, where respondents to our research said it has a dire impact, or a significant impact to customer retention, i.e., if you don't get that payment journey for your customer smoothed out and it's been sort of to a level of high degree of perfection, customers will walk away. Like, how many times have we all walked away when we can't check out of a basket on an e-commerce site we just leave it, right? If you can't check out and there's friction in that process, you're going to check out. So that was a really compelling aspect I'm finding. I think what was very, very encouraging, whilst it wasn't surprising, I think the direction of travel was very much centered around 70% of respondents want to continue that sort of aspect, to continue to digitalize payment journeys for a better customer experience, for faster payments to be made. We're living in a world now where interest rates are going up, inflation is going up, cost of capital is high, and the cash flow for some of these small, medium-sized enterprise, it's the lifeblood of their companies and e-commerce businesses. So the speed at which cash can be made available and liquidity can be made available to these businesses is, it's not just important, it's mission critical depending where you are in your journey as a e-coms. If you're a startup versus maturing, it's super, super business critical in essence.
Yeah, and I think when I was reading through your research guide, that also struck me about the sort of the customer retention side of things, and I think it's interesting to see sort of like the bigger picture of a failed payment. You think, oh, it's just a failed payment. How much effect can that really have on a business? But to see it all kind of laid out with your research and everything like that was really quite striking, and you see why it's such an issue to a lot of, especially like small and medium sized businesses, and helping with cash flow issues, and it's really hampering on growth in a lot of places, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and there's that appreciation as well. I call it the snowball knock-on effect. So if you leave that checkout basket unsatisfied without fulfilling that order and request to buy, likelihood is you're going to tell your friends, you're going to tell your family, you're going to tell your network. So that will snowball in terms of creating impact. Now, we didn't measure that in our survey, but anecdotally, that's what we hear in the market and hear from our customers across the globe. I think these sort of transactional aspect to payments, like the thresholds which you may spend, I think that can have an aspect to, from a buy now pay later scheme point of view. The values tend to be low, but the frequency or volume of transactions is high. I think balancing out the risk versus the reward. I think some are now starting to put some blockers in place. So if you spend over a certain amount, or you've accumulated over a certain amount, they have credit checks in place. So I think they're getting the balance right in that respect. I think the SMB market is still pretty underserved, I would say, in terms of having the right data and the right software for the purposes of payments. And that, I think, will be a growing area, certainly in the marketplace, to solve for. I think for consumers, largely, I'm traveling to Africa next week, and I've had the privilege of traveling to many countries in my role. When I go to Asia, I only have to turn on another app like Grab, and I can, get a cab, I can order some food. So from a consumer point of view, even looking at it from cross-border and geographically, it's really, really improved. I think some of those areas which are being underserved, the SMB market, I think is one to be underserved. But I think from our research, it also just shows that customer need remains supreme. The customer needs are continually evolving, and that's one area you've always got to keep a mindful thought on to stay ahead of the pack.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something we see a lot. The customer is always key, and the whims of the customer do very much lead your business. But Tyler, what did you think to Dal's article? Did you have any thoughts on this?
I think it's really a very strong confirmation of a lot of what we've been looking at historically throughout our work at the Fintech Times, and specifically throughout this podcast. I think the importance of smoother payment journeys across all regions and across all forms of payments can never be overstated. I think that, when we look at the emergence of new regulations, especially things like strong customer authentication, sort of juggling that those elements of security alongside wanting payments to be as quick as possible. I think that's something that the industry should really consider, as Dal has said in his intro. I think It's almost like a balancing act. If you go too fast, you risk compromising the security of the system, and if it's too secure, you risk compromising the speed. So I think this is a really, really fascinating article and a really interesting take on the current state of the global payments market, indeed.
Fantastic stuff. And then Francis, what were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I kind of just wanted to sort of, I suppose, reinforce what you guys have already discussed, and this idea of, the snowball effect, and the importance of customer loyalty, and how one bad experience sort of it dilutes a brand loyalty. And I was looking around and I found some research from the Talk Desk which found that 2/3 of customers say one bad experience will dilute brand loyalty. And it does just have this knock-on effect. And sure, it may not seem like a big thing at first, you lose one customer or two customers, but when word starts to get around, competitors are the ones that benefit from this. And I mean, taking Dar's example of going to Asia and using Grab, for example, if that didn't work, not only does Grab then lose a customer, but one of their competitors will inevitably get a new customer as well. So it's almost twofold, really, in the way that I think of it. At least is that it's not only just a loss; it's a benefit for a competitor. And ultimately, I mean, sure, from a market standpoint, you want that, right? You want to have some competition, healthy competition, but from a business standpoint, it's disastrous. So, yeah, I think it is a really important thing that needs to continue to be highlighted, is the talk around customer loyalty and ensuring that, we're not seeing these failed checkouts.
Yeah, some really interesting insights there, Francis. I mean, Dal, do you have any sort of like last final thoughts on this, and anything else from your research that you want to point out?
Yeah, I think, by the time some of our listeners have listened to this podcast, something would have changed in payments, right? Some new level of innovation would have come out. And I think, it doesn't surprise me anymore when I pick up a podcast, I pick up a journal or an article, and something new, innovative has come out. I'm always fascinated of the next level of innovation that's coming. So the surprise factor is not surprising. I'm just fascinated by the level of innovation. It wouldn't surprise me if you could pay for something through, your optical eye. You literally walk into a shop, you pick something up, the eye registers the fact that you purchased something and you paid for something. That level of innovation, I think, is coming down the line. I would argue not for every market necessarily, across the globe, considering the disparity that we have, where every country, every jurisdiction is on a different path, but on a similar journey to get to the end goal. So, if we maybe converse in another year's time, I'm sure there's something very, very real and life and real that we're talking about that's really changed a customer experience over the next year or so. So yeah, I think it's a case of watch your space. It's happening, and the next level of innovation is only an hour away.
Amazing. I love that so much. But thank you so much for bringing that article to us today, Dal. And if anyone wants to read any more about fintech industry or anything we've spoken about today, head on over to thefintechtimes.com, where you can find plenty more news and insights about the fintech world. And if people want to have a read of the report, Dal, does that just head over to the Lexis Nexis website?
Absolutely.
Amazing stuff. Well, we're going to move on then to our very exciting guest segment, where, Dal, I'm afraid you're going to be grilled with some incredibly, very taxing questions. There's some hard ones here. We call it our quirky questions, but I think we need to change that name. But I mean, Dal, are you ready? Are you ready to have some questions asked?
Cautiously, yes.
Cautiously, yes. Well, start the timer, start the countdown. The very first question. Now, this is going to be a really tough one, I'm sure. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
I love that. Just smooth straight in there. Do you have a dog?
I have Percy, is a family dog.
I have a dog called Percy.
No way, really?
What breed is it?
Cavapoo.
Oh, I have a pug. Oh my god, I love it.
Fantastic.
Meant to be.
It was christened after the Percy pig from Marks and Spencer's.
Oh, ours was a bunch of different reasons. We also, with Percy Pig, we live next to Percy Thrower's Garden Centre. and there's a pug in the Pocahontas Disney film, and he's called Percy. So it all worked out. Oh my god, I love that.
Fantastic. Well, our next question is asking, have you ever owned or paid for anything in cryptocurrency?
No.
Oh, easy answer. Lovely.
I feel like that's probably a minor in the sort of like the minority view now. I feel like most people have probably dabbled in crypto. I mean, I'm not using any stats here, but I don't know. I don't know about you guys, but I would have thought most people would have by now.
I did start with I'm a bit of a dinosaur in industry. Maybe it's the
This is
dinosaur
true.
effect
This is
coming
true.
through. So maybe I set myself up for that question. I haven't. I think what I have, I think not intentionally stayed away from it. I think life takes over, so haven't done it. But I think the fintechs that have like brought out ways to save, invest. I think those have exploded, and I've certainly taken advantage of those means. Like the one thing. Can I plug a company name in this podcast? Is that allowed? Moneybox, fantastic, right? I used to have, again, dinosaur of collecting change when you used to pay for things in cash. Every year I used to get a jar full of money and I'd go to get it transferred. The kids would go with me to get it transferred, and that would be like a treat for them. There's no concept of that anymore because I don't have any change with me. All my change goes into Moneybox. It still gets invested. But I think that's some great innovation that's been done in recent years.
I will just say on that point real quick, I do miss the days of going to the bank, having collected like my 1p's with my dad and being like, I have a
It was
pound
the
now,
best.
I'm rich.
It was the highlight of my year because we used to pay for like our Christmas takeaway with our jar of change.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
So, next question, and in my opinion, probably the most important question of all, is what is the most important part of a full English breakfast? Notably, not your favourite, but the most important.
For me, fried slice. That would be my favourite. The most important. That's my most.
Oh,
my favourite
okay.
fried slice. Most important, bacon. Like, times I've ventured to become a vegetarian, and bacon's brought me back to not being on that path. Bacon, I would say, most important. Favourite, I would say, fried slice.
I agree on the fried slice front. Not enough fry-ups when you like have one out, have the fried bread, and it's just like it's so good. Francis, you're being awfully quiet.
I'm restricting myself here because I feel like our listeners probably already know my opinions on this, and that is that baked beans are the most important. But I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole again. So I'm just going to quickly just stay quiet.
But beans are versatile. I'll give you that. I don't think it's the. I was
They're a
toying
staple.
with either fried slice or black pudding as the favourite. Most important, I still think is bacon.
I feel like
I
you could have
respect it for the
sausage though
beans.
instead of bacon. You know, egg, beans, bacon, sausage. Well, I guess maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. There you go. You know, Freudian slip, and I've said bacon, so I guess maybe you're right. You're onto something.
Oh dear, I love it when we ask this question. It's my
I love
favorite
this
part of
question. I
podcast.
love this. This is a great question. It's such a fun question.
It's just how enraged Francis gets when people say the wrong answer. It's fantastic. But anyway, moving on to something a little bit more relevant. What has been your favourite product or service release in your time with Lexis Nexis Risk Solutions?
I think it's probably the one that we've been building up to and launched actually this quarter. Last quarter, Q1, which is safe payment verification. And it's for the US market. So for dollar settlement, for dollar clearing, if you want to make a payment to a US account using our product now, you can verify the account name and you can verify the account number. So when you say who you're instructing to pay, you know at the point of payment ignition that you are paying the right person. So similar to what's existing in other parts of the globe, we've launched it and very, very excited about it. Our customers are, prospects are, and it's actually had a really good market response. So really excited for solving essentially fraud problems for customers in authorized push payment fraud. Very, very exciting and very, very happy and proud of what the team has achieved there.
Fantastic. Well done for the launch, and I'm so glad it's been received so well.
Thank you.
Thanks. The next question up is, if you were a superhero, what kind of superpower would you have?
Ability to fly. I spend
That's a good
quite
answer.
a lot of my time across a year on aeroplanes, and to be able to whiz across in superhero speed. Got a 12-hour flight to look forward to Africa next week. If I could fly there in 6 or 4 or maybe even 3, that would be amazing.
Would you have a cape? That's another important question. You get the pizzazz with the cape, you know what I mean? You get the style.
All I'm saying is The Incredibles. Let's just remember that, and the plane scene. All I'm saying, capes and planes. Don't know about that one.
I'm not sure if I'm a cape kind of guy. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not. I'm not sure. I'll have to try one on. I've not tried one on. Maybe that's where I should start. My wife's going to be very, because I'm going to go into the house a bit later on and be taking one of her shawls to see if it works or not. What are you doing, Dal? It's the question that was asked earlier today.
We'll expect a LinkedIn post with an update on the answer. So the next question, you've already identified a couple in Moneybox and Grab, but what are your go-to fintech products that you use in your everyday life?
I think fundamentally, I would say I saw a T-shirt last week, and it said something along the lines, a T-shirt or a post, and it said something along the lines of, I saw somebody in Starbucks sitting down, just drinking a coffee, no phone, no laptop, no nothing. And it was essentially, if you look at all of our daily lives, we are connected always by the virtue of our mobile phone. So I think, that connectivity, I think, is a gateway to many products. So primarily I would say the mobile phone and the smartphone. And then in terms of anything from, you can get anything from investing, you can get things like taxi on request, Uber, Nutmeg, Moneybox, iTunes. I think purely from a fintech point of view, I think the most popular ones, I look at and use is Nutmeg and Moneybox. Same for my children's university education. I know it's not going to be cheap, so now's the time to invest and help them along that way.
I mean, that's a very valid answer. I mean, just the mobile phone. We always talk about it, but I don't know why. It never really crossed my mind as being the connector, just in that sort of sense that, every single app, every single available thing that you want, all in the palm of your hand.
Love that. Next question, Dal. If you didn't work in the fintech or the finance industry, what job or industry would you like to work in?
Oh, that's an interesting. Caught me on the spot there, Holly. There,
There must be. What was the dream job? Maybe when you were a kid.
pilot.
I knew you were going to say
Pilot.
pilot. I knew you were going to say pilot.
A bit of a plane spot, I must admit. I like this app. It's called, I think it's called Flight Radar, and basically you can find out what plane is in the sky, where is it going, or where is it come from.
My other half is obsessed with that app.
Hey, I'm in good company then.
All he does. He loves it. He loves it. Every time we go to an airport, he's like out the window, like, airplanes. So I get it. I do.
Fantastic. Our final question for you, Dal, is what have you learned recently about the fintech industry that's really interested you?
I think this aspect of like payments, fraud, financial crime compliance, I can see, and week by week, you're getting closer and closer together. So we can't think of one without the other. And I think that is just, for me, being amplified week in, week out. So, that's a continuous read on that, is something that I continuously read about, and I can just see it coming closer and closer together. We touched upon it here today. We've touched upon it from a fraud angle. We touched on it from a financial crime point of view. We've touched upon it even from a credit worthiness, and to ensure that we're not putting people into debt in some very difficult times that we're living in thus far. So I think all of this is, we don't think about it in its silos. We need to think about it as a collective.
Yeah, that's really interesting and a really good point. Absolutely. That does bring us really nicely on to our very last segment of the podcast, called What I Learned This Week, where we'll share something interesting that we've learned about the fintech world this week, as you just have, Dal. So Francis, what have you learned this week?
So this week, I learned that the European lawmakers, I should say, have given the final approval of the EU's markets in crypto assets, or MiCA regulation, which will make it the first major jurisdiction in the world to introduce a comprehensive crypto law. So that grey area that everyone keeps talking about in the world of crypto, maybe no more.
Amazing stuff. And Tyler, what have you learned this week?
Thanks, Polly. Well, this week I was actually looking at some really, really interesting stats from Cardio that found that over 14 million consumers in the UK are caught in what it describes as a poverty trap of credit cards, with more than 14 billion paid in credit card interest every year. This is according to their latest report.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. And then what I learned this week was that the London Institute of Banking and Finance launched a Fintech glossary, which is a resource designed to provide reference for financial professionals, students, and anyone with an interest in fintech to define some of the terms and the jargon. I just thought, what a brilliant idea. Very useful, and I'm sure it's something that we'll all use at some point, probably very soon. But anyway, that does bring us to the end of our podcast. And Dal, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a genuine pleasure to have you here sharing your insights and just having a really nice chat about fintech.
Polly, Francis, Tyler, it's been incredible. Thank you so much for inviting me. I've really enjoyed the last 30 odd minutes and learned so much, and look forward to the next time.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again for coming. Francis, Tyler, as per usual, thank you for joining me as well. And yeah, catch you all on the next one.
See you next week, guys.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. See you next week.
Thanks all.
Thanks for listening to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast, brought to you by Lexis Nexis Risk Solutions. Don't miss next week's episode and continue the conversation using hashtag TFT News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times.